Okay, everyone, welcome back to episode 2 on hybrid and multi-cloud. In our last episode, John was guiding us through why people adopt hybrid and multi-cloud and some of their motivators. But I'd like to examine a bit more in this episode. What are some of the advantages and disadvantages of having these multiple environments? So, John, what's your perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Leon. So there are lots of different advantages of kind of taking this approach. So we would look at all the positives first. So in terms of being more flexible, more scalable. So flexibility and scalability is baked into public cloud, and we know that. But the way people consume different services, the way the amount of different apps that we now kind of consume, within businesses, there's always a kind of app to fix a business process. By having this kind of approach and not locking yourself into just one way of working, whether that's on premise or within one public cloud or one private cloud, really allows you to respond to exactly what a business needs. It also allows you to focus in on what you need now, but also understanding what you need in the future. So if it's a service that you can run yourself, and it's going to be very seasonal and something that's going to require a lot of changes throughout the year, that you can draw yourself towards the public cloud, that makes more sense to have that as a solution there. If you've got demands around things like compliance, or you need to keep data in a specific area. So we've had lots of conversations with sort of multi-geo companies where they have certain services in certain parts of Europe or in the Middle East where that data can't leave the country. So at that point, it kind of changes your approach of what you can do, and you can't necessarily put it in an Azure public cloud or one of the other vendors, and you have to look at a different solution.
That makes sense to me, and I think I agree, because I've seen and I've had lots of conversations, especially around the vendor lock-in side of things. Yep. We saw the acquisition of VMware and the subsequent impact that's had on licensing and the uncertainty that brought to a lot of customers. And I've seen that be a sort of trigger activity for people wanting to de-risk by not putting all their eggs in one basket, and de-risk their sort of portfolio by expanding that out. The scalability, I think, is another interesting one that you've brought up. I think years ago, sort of pre-cloud, I worked for HMRC, and they introduced the electronic VAT system, and they had thousands, tens of thousands of staff that they needed to train on that new system. Cloud wasn't there, so they could scale up. So that involved a very expensive capital outlay just for a training program, and cloud obviously helped solve for that. So that's kind of interesting, the advantages that you showed there. Can we just touch on maybe some of the disadvantages that you might have when it comes to trying to operate your organization with multiple cloud vendors?
Yeah, sure. It's always interesting when you kind of do these compare and contrast lists between the advantages and the challenges. You always end up with a couple of things on both. So that cost management's a good one, where you can look at providing the best service for the best price. It's always right up there in terms of the requirements when you're trying to find that balance of what you need as a business versus the cost it's going to be. And it may well be. I did a comparison the other day for a customer where we were looking at running something in, they were running something in AWS. I produced a set of cost fit for running it in Azure, and it was markedly cheaper. Now that was just because the services that they were using are cheaper in Azure, and that does happen. Although all the services are very similar, there'll be certain areas where one particular cloud is strong over the other, and it may well mean that let's go ahead and deliver that there. We can deliver it for 20% less, in Azure than we can in AWS, as an example. That's great. Then, if you've got those different workloads across different environments, how do you then bring all that cost management all into one place? Trying to understand, what that pricing looks like across everything is a real challenge. Even though you've got something cheaper, now trying to administer two different environments, two different sets of skills. You might have a set of engineers work within your team that are very proficient in one particular cloud, one particular service, and then you're trying to ask them to then go and support another one. That's a real challenge, you know, there's sort of nuances and changes within those different vendors that doesn't make the skills completely transferable without, you know, quite a bit of upskilling.
Okay, that's an interesting point. And on the security side of things, you know, having security visibility provided by one cloud provider is going to be a different view from another cloud provider, but they're connected by network. So if you're trying to get that high level view, you've got multiple panes of glass. You've also got that kind of translation between those abilities. You quite rightly talked about skills. You and I have spent a career learning cloud and developing our skills in cloud. Throwing in other ones is not an insignificant challenge. There are some things that follow over naturally, but there's a steep learning curve there. And I think that some of that can also introduce support delays because sorry.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, in terms of the things like just like tooling around security. So like you said, you know, you've got understand how this works, understand this, and I've got these set of policies. There may not be a like for like equivalent in you know, the next platform that you're using. And so then all of a sudden you're now not just managing two workloads, you're managing two different sets of policies. You know, and how do you kind of bring that together and kind of show, you know, this is our consistent approach, even though we've got to do different things across, you know, different vendors.
Yeah, and I noticed on your slide you also had data migration and just movement of data. Cloud providers tend to make it very cost effective to ingest data, but much more expensive to move data. And if you've got data moving between multiple clouds, that involves lots of egress, which is additional charges that you might not have if you just had a single vendor. So thank you, John. I think that's some wonderful insights into those kind of the pros and cons of running hybrid cloud. So I'll catch up with you in the next episode, but thank you very much.
Cheers, Liam.